Good morning. Well, here we go. Them. Buckle up, people, because this is a long one. And this is the one in the eye for those who accuse me of only writing sentimental, mushy, and romantic stories. And this story follows several Londoners as they witness the emergence of the figures. These are mysterious, levitating, humanoid silhouettes that appear suddenly across the globe. The story begins with the police officer, Yvonne Marker, who first documents one of these dark, light-rimmed entities in Trafalgar Square. Meanwhile, the novel explores the lives of Gilbert and Drusilla, an eccentric British couple involved in the vintage motorcycle trade and the professional S&M scene. As the characters navigate their complex domestic lives and social circles, the British government begins imposing news blackouts and exclusion zones to manage growing public panic and concern. The plot blends supernatural mystery with gritty realism, focusing on how different social strata react to potential alien invasion. Through the perspective of Gilbert and Drusilla's friend Danial, a government official, the novel hints at a looming state of martial law as Britain and the entire world struggles to comprehend the silent, spectral visitors. Now, in the actual book, I've got a little preface here, which says, This is a work of fiction. The characters and locations portrayed and the names herein are fictitious. And any similarity or identification with the location, name, character, or history of any person or product or entity is entirely confidential, coincidental, and unintentional. Yeah, right. That's in the preface anyway. So, as usual, I hope you enjoy the AI voices. I think it's done a justifiable, decent job, as usual. And if you would like to subscribe and ring that bell, that would be fantastic. And if you comment as usual, I will read and reply to everyone. I hope you enjoy them. Oops, let's do it with this hand, and I won't cut my face off.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. It is genuinely so good to have you sitting right here with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us again.
You know, whenever we sit down to craft one of these custom-tailored explorations specifically for you, we're typically analyzing a sprawling historical event, or maybe dissecting a recent breakthrough in neuroscience.
Or unpacking a massive cultural phenomenon.
Right. But today's deep dive is something else entirely. I have to admit, it's been living in my head rent-free all week.
Oh, same here. It is relentless.
We are exploring a remarkably chilling, deeply apocalyptic sci-fi narrative. It's entirely centered on the sudden, inexplicable, and global appearance of these mysterious, light-absorbing entities.
Yeah, simply known as the figures. Or in some of the source materials, just them.
Them. Just a terrifyingly vague concept.
And what makes this particular narrative so endlessly compelling isn't just the extraterrestrial, or perhaps, as we'll debate later, interdimensional mystery of the invasion itself.
Because if you're looking for a story about laser battles and fighter jets blowing up motherships, this isn't it.
Exactly. Not even close. The real core of this text is how it utilizes an existential global threat as a high-powered magnifying glass. It examines deeply flawed, incredibly eccentric, and sometimes entirely scandalous human beings.
It really is a surgical look at how extreme, impossible circumstances force extreme personal transformations.
And how the collapse of the macro world immediately shatters the micro worlds we build for ourselves.
That is precisely what drew me in. We're experiencing the absolute end of the world, not through the eyes of the president in a war room. Or a four-star general looking at radar.
We're seeing it through the eyes of everyday people. Everyday people who harbor some profoundly dark highly guarded secrets.
Yes. And before we really get into the weeds, a quick heads up for you listening. Our mission today absolutely requires us to navigate some mature, racy themes.
It does. A significant portion of our source material dives into the secret double lives of our main characters.
Specifically delving into the highly lucrative underground world of S&M clubs and professional domination. We aren't going to shy away from that, but we are going to look at it factually and analytically.
Right, because we're using that extreme lifestyle as a psychological baseline. We needed to understand just how radically a person's moral and mental architecture can fracture when the world seemingly comes to an end.
It's an absolutely essential contrast.
The author is deliberately using the extreme sensory overload, the hyperspecific aesthetics, and the rigid power dynamics of that underground lifestyle, and contrasting it directly with the absolute terrifying nothingness of the figures.
You simply cannot truly appreciate the metamorphosis of these characters without intimately understanding where they started.
The sensory excess of their lives is the thesis. The sensory void of the figures is the antithesis.
It is the ultimate juxtaposition. Okay, let's unpack this. And to do that properly, we have to ground ourselves in the very first recorded sighting.
Let's do it.
I want you to really visualize this scene because the author strips away all the Hollywood glamour of an alien encounter. It is February 16th. It is exactly 3:47 in the morning.
We are in London.
And it has been raining a relentless, freezing, miserable winter deluge for a day and a half. The pavements are slick and dripping.
Everything is absolutely saturated.
Enter WPC Yvonne Marker. For our non-UK listeners, WPC stands for Woman Police Constable.
She's 10 hours into a grueling, mind-numbing 12-hour shift.
She is freezing, she is exhausted, her boots are soaked. All she is thinking about is getting home and having a normal breakfast with her kids.
She's traversing the northern section of Whitehall, heading into Trafalgar Square. Because of the weather and the hour, the street cleaners have already been through.
The square is completely empty, spotless, shining with rainwater.
The famous fountains are totally silent. The only sign of life she sees is the dark silhouette of an urban fox slinking near the base of Nelson's Column.
It's that deep, dead hour of the night where reality always feels just a little bit thinner.
The cognitive load is low. Sensory input is minimal. Her brain is basically running on autopilot.
Right, she's in that liminal space. So she steps onto the pedestrianized North Terrace. Now, technically, she's not supposed to be loitering there.
But she pulls out an e-cigarette for a quick illicit drag.
Just a tiny moment of rebellion in a heavily regimented job.
Yep.
She takes 3 drags, tucks it back into her pocket, turns around, and that is exactly when she sees it.
A vaporous light.
An apparition that absolutely categorically was not there 30 seconds ago.
And her initial reaction is so incredibly human. I mean, her brain desperately tries to rationalize the sensory input.
Trafalgar Square is globally famous for its street performers, the floating Yodas, the living statues painted in silver.
So her first thought is, it's just a busker.
But it's 3:47 a.m. in the freezing, pouring rain.
There is no audience. And as she looks closer, the cognitive rationalization completely falls apart. Because whatever she's looking at, it is physically impossible.
It violates the fundamental laws of thermodynamics and gravity. She realizes it's humanoid in shape. Roughly about her height, maybe 172 centimeters.
It is floating.
Exactly 30 centimeters off the wet pavement.
No hidden poles, no mirrors, no optical illusions, just hovering in midair.
And the visual description of this entity is where the profound, creeping horror really starts to set in. It has a soft violet-white glow around its outer rim.
Which is just bright enough to cast a faint shadow on the whetstone below it.
But the interior of the figure, it isn't just dark. It is a void.
It is the deepest, most absolute, light-absorbing black imaginable.
If photons enter it, they do not bounce back. It is the absence of visual data.
What's fascinating here is the specific type of psychological terror this induces. As we mentioned, this isn't a movie monster roaring, bearing fangs, or blasting lasers.
It's an anomaly of physics.
WPC Marker is paralyzed not because it's actively attacking her, but because its very passive existence shatters her entire ontological framework. She is staring at a tear in reality.
The narrative notes that looking at the figure reminds her of the inky blackness of her childhood bedroom at night.
I find that to be a brilliant psychological touch by the author. It strips a highly trained, modern police officer down to the most primal, universal human fear.
The fear of the dark.
Exactly. It evokes that suffocating feeling of an infinite empty depth hiding right in front of you. A space where predators could be lurking, but your eyes simply cannot penetrate it.
It's that evolutionary dread. She actually tries to rely on her police training to bridge the gap. She speaks to it. She says, "Hello, can you hear me?"
And there is nothing. Total, absolute silence.
It doesn't flinch. It doesn't turn. It doesn't even acknowledge her existence in any measurable way.
She backs away, her heart hammering against her ribs, and she radios it in. She knows full well how entirely insane she sounds reporting a floating, glowing void.
Within minutes, a transport van with 3 other officers arrives. They step out, fully expecting to find the WPC marker is having a nervous breakdown from exhaustion.
But then they see it too.
And one of these newly arrived officers, maybe driven by a bit more bravado, or perhaps just sheer, unadulterated foolishness, actually walks right up to the entity and tries to touch its arm.
And that moment of physical contact reveals something even more baffling about the nature of these entities. When the officer reaches out, he doesn't get burned.
He isn't electrocuted.
His hand isn't severed. Instead, he experiences an intense, brittle, deeply unfriendly cold.
He immediately staggers backward, his face turning completely pale.
Looking utterly deranged, he starts babbling to the others that he touched nothing, but it was a nothing that was somehow entirely firm.
A nothing that was firm. That phrasing is so unsettling.
It is a complete sensory paradox. Neurologically speaking, our brains rely on consistent feedback loops. When you touch something solid, you expect visual confirmation of its surface?
Right. And when you touch a void, you expect zero resistance.
Exactly. For this officer's brain to process absolute darkness that possesses the physical firmness of a statue, combined with a sudden, unnatural plummet in temperature, it essentially causes a localized cognitive collapse.
His brain simply cannot compute the conflicting data streams.
So we fast forward a couple of hours, and the British government's reaction is exactly what you'd expect from any massive bureaucracy confronted with the impossible.
Absolute, immediate, headless panic, followed instantly by a total authoritarian clampdown.
By dawn, the entirety of Trafalgar Square is cordoned off.
We're talking multiple layers of police tape, a fleet of emergency vehicles, heavily armed marksmen on the surrounding rooftops.
In helicopters circling overhead, the government immediately issues a draconian news blackout. They shut down the surrounding roads, abruptly close the nearby underground stations.
And tell the waking public absolutely nothing. But here's the brilliant, jarring pivot of this narrative. While the highest levels of government are secretly hyperventilating over a localized physics anomaly, what are the everyday citizens of London doing?
They are entirely oblivious. They are living their wildly eccentric, messy, deeply human lives.
Which brings us directly to our incredibly unlikely protagonists.
The narrative violently shifts from the chilling, sterile silence of Trafalgar Square to the chaotic, sweaty, sensory-drenched aftermath of a Saturday night out.
We are introduced to Drusilla and Gilbert, a married couple who are stumbling out of a subterranean, sadomasochistic nightclub in Clerkenwell called Torture at roughly 5:01 in the morning.
Talk about giving the reader whiplash.
We go from a silent alien void absorbing all light to a couple standing on a grimy street corner draped in black leather, heavy rubber, and squeaking latex. The visual contrast is astounding.
Gilbert is described as this giant bear of a man. He's completely bald, sports a massive unruly beard, and is leaning heavily on a highly fashionable antique walking stick.
Drusilla, his wife, is incredibly beautiful, sharply angular. She's wearing a scarlet latex microdress, agonizingly high 6-inch stilettos, and a blonde nylon wig completely covering her natural dark hair.
They are standing under a street lamp with their best friend, Daniel.
And Daniel is currently wearing a full-body, skin-tight rubber suit and is entirely out of his mind on some highly questionable hallucinogens he purchased in the club's bathroom.
It's a very specific, highly insulated, incredibly hedonistic subculture. They eventually manage to pour themselves into the back of a black cab and head home to East London.
They live in a place called Chapman Buildings. It's a massive, converted, late Victorian schoolhouse. They proudly consider themselves neo-Victorians.
Or perhaps extreme steampunk enthusiasts.
Mm.
Their entire aesthetic, their clothes, their home, their hobbies is incredibly curated and, frankly, highly provocative.
Oh, provocative is putting it mildly. Let's look at Gilbert's world first. He runs a specialized mechanic shop called Bailey's Bikes, where he lovingly restores vintage, pre-1950s British and European motorcycles.
His personal ride is a stunning 1952 Norton Big 4.
But the deeply strange, highly controversial part, he decorates his mechanic shop with authentic, incredibly expensive Nazi and Luftwaffe memorabilia.
We're talking a massive swastika flag draped across the back wall.
And full mannequins, dressed in perfectly preserved, Waffen-SS and Wehrmacht officer uniforms.
Now, it is absolutely crucial to note, and the text makes this explicitly clear to the reader, that Gilbert is not a fascist.
Right. He holds absolutely zero political sympathy for the Third Reich. He doesn't subscribe to the ideology at all.
Instead, he has an obsessive, purely aesthetic fascination with the tailoring, the sharp lines, and the intimidating history of the uniforms themselves.
He views them entirely stripped of their historical horror, seeing them merely as high-end historical fashion.
But predictably and understandably, this deeply offends his clientele, particularly the elderly customers who actually lived through the Blitz and had German bombs dropped on their neighborhoods.
You can't just display a Waffen-SS uniform in London and expect people to appreciate the stitching.
No, absolutely not. But Gilbert is so relentlessly cheerful, so incredibly laid back and affable, that he somehow manages to get away with it.
He just shrugs off the disgusted stares of his customers with a smile. It perfectly highlights how completely insulated his world is.
He values his own niche aesthetic obsessions far more than he values societal norms or the very real historical trauma of the people around him. He is living in a bubble of his own design.
Precisely. It's the ultimate triumph of aesthetics over empathy. And to add to his quirky, insulated nature, he also owns this ridiculous 1960s BSA motorcycle sidecar that he affectionately calls the Dosser.
It literally has a tiny, absurd toy house built right onto the side of it, complete with the little fabric curtains in the windows and a fake chimney.
He's an eccentric, completely absorbed in his mechanical and historical fascinations. But as strange as Gilbert is, Drusilla's double life is where the narrative tension genuinely tightens.
On paper, for tax purposes, she runs an online bookstore called Transcendental Books, supposedly dealing in rare, arcane, occult texts.
But the narrative makes it clear that the bookstore generates almost zero revenue. Her actual income, the massive influx of cash that pays for their lavish neo-Victorian lifestyle, comes entirely from her underground work.
As a highly paid professional dominatrix.
This is where we get into the racy, mature elements of the story, and the author does not hold back. One of the large, high-ceiling bedrooms in their converted schoolhouse isn't a guest room.
It is a fully equipped, professional-grade BDSM dungeon.
We're talking polished mahogany wood, reinforced steel suspension structures, and a vast, meticulously organized arsenal of leather restraints, floggers, and whips.
And to truly understand Drusilla's character arc later in the story, we have to look very factually at the extreme power dynamics she orchestrates in that room. The narrative introduces us to one of her most regular, lucrative clients.
A man known only as Mr. X.
Yes. Mr. X appears to be a tremendously wealthy, highly educated, upper-class professional. Given his speech patterns and financial resources, he is likely a high-ranking executive in the financial sector or perhaps corporate law.
He pays Drusilla £200, which, in the context of the story's timeline, is a very substantial hourly rate for a strict 2-hour session.
And the dynamic they engage in is an absolute radical inversion of his presumed daily life.
She strips this powerful, wealthy man naked. She forces him into a cheap, frilly French maid's outfit,
complete with a ridiculous wig and smeared lipstick.
She locks a heavy leather collar around his neck and literally forces him to scrub her floors and clean her house while she sits in a velvet chair sipping tea and reading a book.
And the session strictly concludes with physical punishment. She beats him with a heavy leather bat for supposedly doing an inadequate job of dusting the baseboards.
Now, the text makes it clear that for Drusilla, this isn't about mutual sexual gratification. It's a pure, unadulterated exertion of absolute power, control, and cruelty over a man who willingly pays to submit to it.
If we look at this sociologically, it is a fascinating commentary on the commodification of submission.
Right. High net worth men who spend their entire lives making high-stakes decisions and bearing the crushing weight of corporate authority.
They often seek out environments where they are completely stripped of their autonomy. They are paying for the psychological release of powerlessness.
But the tragedy of Drusilla's setup is that her cruelty isn't just a theatrical performance for her paying clients. That dark, domineering energy bleeds heavily into her personal life,
completely contaminating her relationships.
It really does. Because Drusilla has a 10-year-old son from a previous marriage. His real name is Robert. But she utterly refuses to call him Robert.
She calls him Zip.
Why? Because she expects him to move like a zipper, fast, sharp, and silent, to complete his household chores before she can unleash her wrath on him.
She treats her own flesh and blood with the exact same cold, transactional disdain that she directs at Mr. X.
Robert is practically an indentured servant in his own home. He tiptoes around the sprawling apartment, constantly hypervigilant.
Absolutely terrified of triggering her anger. It is genuinely heartbreaking to read. The psychological damage being inflicted on that child is profound.
Interestingly, Gilbert, who has no biological relation to Robert, is the only source of warmth or humanity in the boy's life.
Gilbert secretly slips Zip a crumpled 5-pound note every week, paying him to sit in the garage and polish the intricate wire spokes of the vintage motorcycles.
It's Gilbert's subversive way of giving the boy a modicum of financial independence, a safe haven away from his mother, and a momentary taste of childhood joy.
And just to add another layer of immense stress to this incredibly toxic household, Drusilla is currently 3 months pregnant with Gilbert's child.
Yet, despite the pregnancy, she absolutely refuses to alter her hedonistic lifestyle. She continues to drink heavily.
She chain smokes cigarettes, and she regularly smokes hashish.
This is causing massive explosive friction with Gilbert. Beneath his cheerful exterior, he is terrified for the neurological and physical health of their unborn baby.
But Drusilla is fiercely unyielding. She views any attempt to curb her behavior as an assault on her bodily autonomy.
What's fascinating here is the author is meticulously painting a portrait of a woman who is physically stunning, sharply intelligent, but spiritually bankrupt.
Gilbert himself internally notes at one point that he has never in his life seen a wider, more tragic gap between a beautifully aesthetic exterior and a completely rotten soul.
She exerts total, terrifying control over the men in her dungeon, yet she exercises absolutely zero control over her own destructive, selfish impulses.
And then there's Danial, the third pillar of this bizarre trio. I want to spend some time on him because his background is crucial.
Danial is an aristocratic, privately hero-educated, incredibly wealthy man who holds a highly classified, top-secret job within the British Secret Service at Westminster.
He is Gilbert's best friend. But Daniel's obsession with the extreme S&M world doesn't stem from mere boredom or curiosity. It comes from a place of deep, profound childhood trauma.
Yes, the narrative reveals that as a young child, Danial and his sister were raised in a sprawling, wealthy estate by a deeply sadistic nanny named Agnes.
This woman frequently, systematically, and brutally beat him under the guise of aristocratic discipline.
So his entire understanding of intimacy is completely warped.
Exactly. In psychological terms, Danial is exhibiting classic trauma repetition compulsion. The severe abuse inflicted by Nanny Agnes entirely rewired his developing brain's understanding of intimacy, care, and power.
As an adult, he is entirely incapable of forming normal, emotionally vulnerable, romantic relationships with women.
His only viable outlet for intimacy is paying women, specifically women like Drusilla, to humiliate, degrade, and physically hurt him.
He is subconsciously recreating his childhood trauma, but this time in a highly controlled transactional environment where he, the adult, is ostensibly the one holding the financial power.
It's a tragic, desperately flawed coping mechanism for profound inner damage.
So I want you, the listener, to just pause and imagine yourself in this exact setting for a second. If you suddenly found out that the world was quite literally going to end tomorrow, who are the people standing next to you?
Would your deeply guarded secrets, your bizarre coping mechanisms, your carefully curated aesthetics, your hidden bank accounts, would any of it suddenly seem entirely laughably trivial?
Because while Drusilla is screaming at Mr. X in a frilly maid's outfit, and while Danial is agonizing over a brutal drug-induced hangover, the government's desperate news blackout on Trafalgar Square completely and spectacularly fails.
Because, quite simply, you cannot cover up a localized anomaly when it suddenly becomes a ubiquitous global phenomenon.
The narrative violently pans out from the claustrophobic dungeon in East London back to the macro global scale.
The figures begin appearing worldwide, and as they do, the international scientific community mobilizes, and the data starts pouring in, revealing a terrifying, rigidly consistent pattern.
Right. They appear out of nowhere. They remain locked in a fixed geographical location for exactly 24 hours.
During that 24-hour period, they slowly, almost imperceptibly, rotate a full 360 degrees.
And then, at the exact expiration of the 24 hours, they completely vanish.
But the locations they manifest in are not randomly distributed. This isn't a scattering of entities in empty oceans or deserts.
They are appearing in locations that are highly strategic, densely populated, or soaked in historical tragedy.
The examples the text gives are chilling. One of the figures materializes directly in the center lane of the M3 motorway in England during rush hour.
Because it absorbs all light, a driver doesn't see it until it's too late, causing a horrific multi-car pileup.
And somehow, the sudden manifestation of this entity in the airspace above the motorway contributes to a commercial plane crash right above the wreckage. It's total carnage.
Other figures appear on the impeccably manicured lawn of the White House. One appears right outside the walls of the Kremlin in Moscow.
Another stands silently next to the Freedom Tower in New York City. One appears right in the middle of the heavily fortified, mine-riddled Korean demilitarized zone.
And perhaps most chillingly, from a sociological standpoint, they begin appearing at sites of profound historical trauma. One manifests at the gates of Auschwitz.
Another stands silently on the overgrown battlefields of the Somme in France.
This raises an important question, one that the world's best scientific and military minds in this story are desperately trying to answer. Are they studying us?
Are they drawn like moths to a flame to the geographic coordinates of immense human suffering and cruelty?
Are they trying to act as a warning system for future disasters, like the pileup on the M3? Or, in the most terrifying interpretation of all, are they the actual cause of the suffering, feeding off the ambient trauma?
Daniel, utilizing his highly classified Secret Service clearance, actually goes rogue. He leaves Westminster, visits Drusilla and Gilbert at the Chapman buildings, and drops the horrific, unvarnished truth on them.
The global governments have absolutely zero idea what they're dealing with.
The military has hit these entities with everything in their diagnostic arsenal. They've used targeting lasers, ground-penetrating radar, massive doses of radiation, and focused electromagnetic pulses.
The results are utterly zero. The figures emit no radiation. They do not disrupt surrounding electromagnetic fields.
As we know, they do not reflect a single photon of light. They just exist. They are entirely impervious to our physical reality.
Daniel, being a student of history, explains the concept of the phony war to his friends. For context, this refers to that excruciating period at the very beginning of World War II, roughly from late 1939 to early 1940.
War had been officially declared, the existential threat of Nazi Germany was globally acknowledged, but the actual large-scale bombing and fighting hadn't yet commenced.
It's the waiting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It creates an unbearable, suffocating psychological tension within the populace. You know absolute doom is coming, you know the world is going to change forever, but you can't fight back because there is nothing tangible to shoot at yet.
The figures are the ultimate manifestation of a phony war. They aren't firing plasma cannons, they aren't abducting citizens, they aren't blowing up capital cities.
But their mere, silent, unyielding presence is enough to completely unravel the fragile fabric of human society.
And Daniel is so utterly convinced that modern civilization is about to collapse that he commits a staggering act of high treason.
He secretly accesses his vast personal wealth and illegally purchases £1 million worth of solid gold bullion.
He completely loses faith in fiat currency, knowing that paper money and digital bank accounts will be entirely worthless within weeks.
But his superiors in the Secret Service trace the massive financial transaction. They pull him in, interrogate him, and instantly suspend him, charging him with sedition.
Which perfectly illustrates how rigid authority structures respond to uncontrollable existential threats. The government cannot control the figures, so they double down on controlling their own people.
They view Daniel's totally rational preparation for societal collapse as a defeatist, anti-government act of betrayal. They punish anyone who breaks rank, even if that person is acting out of pure, logical self-preservation.
But Daniel's paranoid instincts are entirely 100% correct, because the figures themselves do absolutely nothing physical to harm humanity. They literally just stand there and slowly rotate.
But it turns out humanity doesn't need an alien army to destroy itself. We are more than capable of tearing our own world apart out of sheer, unadulterated, primal fear.
And that leads us directly into the complete and total breakdown of global society. We enter a phase of the narrative that is, frankly, terrifyingly plausible.
Think about how fragile our modern supply chains are. We rely on just-in-time delivery. Within hours of the news spreading, supermarkets globally are stripped entirely bare.
People are fighting in the aisles over canned goods. The internet, overwhelmed by billions of people searching for answers and streaming news, becomes incredibly patchy.
And then, backbone servers fail completely. The power grid, lacking maintenance and fueled by panic buying of fuel, starts initiating rolling blackouts.
And the general populace just entirely loses its collective mind. Sociologists within the narrative coin a brilliant, terrifying term for it. They call it the emotional plague.
Yes, the emotional plague. It's essentially a rapidly spreading contagion of paranoia, fanatical thinking, and extreme tribalism.
In Paris, the panic boils over into massive violent riots. The infrastructure collapses so quickly that people are literally being trampled and dying in the streets.
In London, the police lose control. There is thick tear gas choking Piccadilly Circus, and armed, desperate gangs begin roaming the arterial roads, hijacking cars and looting homes.
The normal, invisible rules of the social contract, the idea that we all agree not to hurt each other so we can live in peace, evaporates instantaneously. We are thrown back into a Hobbesian state of nature.
And out of this chaos, the weirdest and darkest human psychological responses start emerging. We see the birth of a bizarre cult phenomenon that the media dubs the Blacks.
The Blacks are a fascinating psychological defense mechanism. These are terrified, desperate citizens who completely abandon their normal lives.
They dress entirely in skin-tight, light-absorbing black outfits, often wearing expressionless, featureless black masks.
They go out onto the public sidewalks, find a spot, and stand absolutely, perfectly still, slowly rotating, directly imitating the alien figures.
It's so deeply pathetic and disturbing. Why do they do it? In psychoanalytic terms, it is a textbook case of identifying with the aggressor.
They believe that by showing total subservience, by erasing their own human individuality and mimicking the invaders, they will somehow be spared when the inevitable violent extermination begins.
It's a twisted, submissive homage born entirely of terror. They are trying to camouflage themselves within the apocalypse.
But the homage gets much, much darker than just standing silently in cosplay. Horrific, genuinely stomach-churning reports start filtering through the erratic, dying news networks.
In a remote, rural area of Romania, the fear regresses into ancient superstition. A local prison is completely overrun by a massive mob of panicked, desperate locals.
They smash through the gates, drag the terrified inmates out of their cells, march them into the surrounding forest, and literally perform ritual human sacrifices in front of a figure that had materialized nearby.
They are slitting throats, hoping to appease the glowing void. Within days, humanity rapidly regresses from the digital age to a medieval sacrificial mindset.
The veneer of civilization is shown to be incredibly thin, and the British government's response to this sweeping anarchy is swift and brutal.
The Prime Minister bypasses Parliament and enacts emergency martial law. The regular police are deemed ineffective, so the government deploys specialized military units called Rangers.
These aren't peacekeepers. These are battle-hardened soldiers who were given explicit, unquestionable shoot-to-kill orders.
A devastatingly strict 6.0 BM curfew is enforced across the nation, and they mean it. If you are caught on the street at 6.01 p.m., you aren't read your rights.
You aren't arrested, put in the back of a squad car. You are shot on sight.
Daniel, leveraging his remaining government contacts, has to frantically warn Gilbert and Drusilla. He tells them to double lock their heavy doors, draw the curtains, and absolutely under no circumstances look out the windows.
Because the military is about to sweep through East London and violently cleanse the streets of looters in a desperate, bloody bid to reinstate basic civic infrastructure.
And throughout this massive global descent into sheer madness, the author brilliantly keeps snapping the camera lens back to our intimate, deeply flawed cast of characters in their East London flat.
We get to see exactly how Gilbert reacts to the end of the world. And his reaction is incredibly stubbornly pragmatic.
It really is. Gilbert doesn't panic. He goes into pure survival mode. His main concerns are practically securing his shop, violently protecting his beloved vintage motorcycles,
Siphoning petrol from abandoned cars, and desperately trying to check on his fierce 70-year-old mother.
And by the way, his mother is a total icon in this story. She is sitting alone in her posh, quiet suburban house with a loaded, completely unlicensed, heavy-caliber handgun tucked neatly under her floral sofa cushion.
She is sitting there sipping tea, perfectly prepared to shoot any looter who breaks her window directly in the groin. She is completely unfazed.
Gilbert and his mother represent the stubborn, practical, deeply British survivalist spirit. Keep calm and load the magazine.
Exactly. But Drusilla's reaction is the absolute antithesis of Gilbert's pragmatism. Her reaction perfectly, tragically mirrors the global fanaticism we just discussed.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the macro-level societal breakdown of the emotional plague is reflected precisely in the micro-level breakdown of her own mind.
And the specific catalyst for her profound psychological fracture happens at what Daniel deeply cynically refers to as an end-of-the-world party.
Right. Let's dig into that sequence because it is a massive turning point. Just before the strict military curfews hit and travel becomes impossible, Daniel invites Drusilla and Gilbert to a massive, sprawling, drug-fueled party at his wealthy, aristocratic estate.
The atmosphere is one of pure, suffocating nihilism. Everyone in attendance assumes they're going to be dead within the week, so they throw themselves headfirst into complete, uninhibited, hedonistic oblivion.
They are drinking the finest wines, taking every drug available, essentially trying to numb themselves before the executioner arrives.
Drusilla, despite being well into her pregnancy, gets incredibly intoxicated. She's consuming massive amounts of alcohol and smoking heavy hashish.
And in her heavily altered, intoxicated state, she wanders away from Gilbert and the main crowd. She gets separated and finds herself cornered alone on the top floor of the sprawling house by an older, wealthy man she doesn't even know.
This man, driven by the lawless atmosphere of the party, forces himself on her. He corners her against the banister, aggressively kissing her, tearing at her clothes, pulling up her dress.
It's a terrifying, visceral scene. Through the thick, confusing haze of the alcohol and drugs, Drusilla feels a sudden, overwhelming surge of raw, primal fear. She realizes she is trapped.
She fights back the only way she physically can in that moment. She violently bites down on the man's nose. She bites so hard she actually tastes his blood in her mouth.
He screams in pain, strikes her hard across the face, and in the ensuing struggle, she loses her footing in her heels. She falls backward, tumbling violently down an entire steep flight of hardwood stairs.
The physical toll is immense. She suffers a severe concussion, massive bruising, and has to be rushed to a highly secure private hospital.
And when she finally regains consciousness in that hospital bed, the Drusilla we knew, the cynical, fiercely independent, hedonistic, cruel dominatrix, is completely irrevocably gone.
The sheer trauma of the near assault, the traumatic brain injury from the concussion, the lingering guilt regarding her pregnancy, and the crushing existential dread of the silent alien figures all violently collide in her psyche.
It causes a massive, radical personality shift. We are witnessing a total unmoored moral reckoning.
She wakes up, looks at Gilbert, and immediately, with terrifying calmness, declares that the alien figures are actually angels. She tells her husband that she feels entirely reborn.
And she doesn't just say it, she backs it up with immediate radical action. She completely stops drinking. She stops smoking weed and cigarettes cold turkey without a single withdrawal symptom.
As soon as she gets back to the Chapman buildings, she marches straight into her meticulously curated, incredibly expensive S&M dungeon. She takes a heavy wood saw and a claw hammer, and she completely dismantles her entire life's work.
It is a vivid, violent purge of her past sins. She physically chops up the heavy wooden St. Andrew's crosses. She takes shears and slices up the expensive, custom-made leather harnesses.
She violently throws all the floggers, the chains, and the latex outfits into heavy black plastic trash bags, dragging them out and dumping them in the hallway. She is literally tearing down the physical architecture of her cruelty.
But the way she treats her son, Robert, is where the real psychological horror of her transformation lies. Remember, she used to call him Zip and treat him like a terrified slave.
Suddenly she stops. She starts using his real name, Robert. He kneels down, speaks to him in a soft, gentle, almost whispering tone. She tries to hug him.
But the incredibly tragic irony here is that this sudden, unearned kindness terrifies the young boy infinitely more than her previous abuse.
It is a brilliant psychological observation by the author. Children of severe abuse learn to survive by adapting to the specific patterns of their abuser.
Robert knew the rules of Zip. He knew how to avoid her wrath. But this sudden, angelic, whispering persona, it shatters his survival framework.
He is entirely convinced that his mother has completely, dangerously lost her mind. He is so viscerally terrified of this new, gentle Drusilla that he actually runs away from home.
He sneaks out and hides, trembling in the bottom of a closet in the apartment of their neighbors, Lee and Paula, because he is so scared of his own mother.
And the confrontation that follows with those neighbors perfectly illustrates how far gone Drusilla is. When Drusilla calmly goes knocking on doors looking for Robert, the neighbor, Paula, is absolutely horrified by Drusilla's dead-eyed, fanatical demeanor.
Paula actually goes into her kitchen, pulls out a massive 12-inch chef's knife, and points it directly at Drusilla to protect the boy. Paula literally threatens to stab her if she comes any closer to Robert.
Drusilla has totally, completely alienated herself from the normal, rational world.
And her religious zealotry just continues to violently escalate. Shortly after the knife incident, Drusilla manages to bypass the security doors and goes all the way up to the flat, rain-slicked roof of the Chapman buildings.
It's a massive, fatal drop to the concrete below. She stands right at the very edge, her toes hanging over the precipice, screaming at the top of her lungs at the gray sky.
She is loudly ranting to the angels, declaring that she believes in them, demanding they judge her, shouting that she knows they can read her innermost thoughts.
Gilbert literally has to tackle her and physically drag her, kicking and screaming back inside to save her life.
But the theology of her madness doesn't stay static. As the global situation worsens, as the martial law gets bloodier and the figures keep silently rotating, Drusilla's belief system darkly mutates.
The internet occasionally flickers to life, and during one of those brief windows, she discovers a radical, extreme, female-only religious cult operating online, led by a charismatic, terrifying woman named Martha.
Martha's theology is entirely different. She convinces Drusilla that because the figures are completely smooth and hairless, they aren't angels of mercy at all. They are devils.
They are ancient evil spirits from hell that have broken through the veil of reality to drag humanity down.
And Drusilla absorbs this new dogma entirely. So what is her response to this revelation? She walks into her bathroom, takes a sharp razor, and shaves her beautiful dark hair completely off.
She shaves her head totally bald, leaving herself looking stark and skeletal. She calmly tells a horrified Gilbert that removing her hair is the only physical way to stop the devils from transmitting their evil, corrupting thoughts directly into her brain cortex.
It is so incredibly disturbing. And then standing there, bald and shivering, she drops the ultimate unforgivable bombshell on her husband.
She coldly informs Gilbert that she is leaving him. Her plan is to carry the pregnancy to term, physically hand the newborn baby over to him the moment it is born, and then permanently abandon him.
She's gonna leave Gilbert, the new baby, and the terrified Robert forever, so she can travel to join Martha's cult compound and dedicate the rest of her life to physically fighting the devils.
It is a stunning, deeply tragic irony that cuts to the very core of her character. Think about it. She actively gives up her physical sadism. She stops whipping wealthy men for money. She destroys the dungeon.
But in doing so, she ends up inflicting an unimaginably cruel, lifelong emotional trauma on her own family by abandoning them in the middle of a literal apocalypse.
She trades the leather corset and the whip for a hairless, ascetic religious fanaticism. But the core underlying selfishness of her character remains entirely intact.
She is still ultimately choosing her own psychological release and her own complex needs over the fundamental welfare and safety of her children. The aesthetics of her cruelty changed, but the cruelty itself merely evolved.
That is a phenomenal way to put it. The aesthetics changed, but the cruelty remained. Now, while Drusilla is descending into this absolute inescapable religious madness, Daniel and the remnants of the world's scientific community are desperately clinging to the only thing they have left.
Empirical data. The global governments, operating out of underground bunkers, are trying to decode the science of the unknowable. And Daniel, risking further sedition charges, manages to share some highly classified mind-bending breakthroughs with Gilbert.
This brings us to what the scientific community in the narrative calls the Cambridge experiment. Now, scientists at Cambridge University had finally cracked the timeline.
They knew exactly, down to the millisecond, when a specific figure in their sector was scheduled to complete its 24-hour cycle and disappear.
So they set up an array of incredibly advanced, high-speed cameras capable of shooting an astounding 50,000 frames per second, aiming them directly at the figure for the final 3 seconds of its manifestation.
And when they take that massive amount of visual data and slow the footage down frame by agonizing frame, they discover something incredible. The figures don't just blink out of existence like a turned-off light bulb.
They actually lose physical cohesion from the outside in. The glowing outer edges dissolve into the atmosphere first, rapidly followed by the absolute black core. It's a process of rapid physical degradation.
But the thermal data they captured alongside the visual footage is even more revealing and honestly terrifying. As we established, the figures constantly emit a profound, unnatural cold.
But right before they vanish in that microscopic fraction of a second of degradation, their internal temperature violently, massively spikes to match normal atmospheric levels.
Daniel literally compares the thermal reading to the detonation of a bomb.
Precisely. In the realm of thermodynamics, you cannot have a sudden, massive spike in thermal energy without a source. It hints at an unimaginably massive, previously suppressed exchange of energy occurring in a microsecond.
It suggests that whatever these entities are, they are containing an astronomical amount of power, and returning to their origin point requires them to vent that energy. It's a level of applied physics that human beings simply do not possess the capacity to understand.
They also discover one tiny, almost pathetic vulnerability. The military proved the figures are totally impervious to bullets, tank shells, lasers, and lethal radiation.
But the scientists discovered that very specific, highly targeted high-frequency sound waves can actually affect them.
If you blast them with this frequency, it causes a slight shimmer in their form and can actually delay their scheduled disappearance by a tiny fraction of a second.
It doesn't hurt them, it doesn't destroy them, but it proves that they interact with acoustic waves in our atmosphere.
But here's where it gets really interesting and where the data shifts from physics into the realm of philosophy and mathematics.
The global tracking systems, monitoring the precise coordinates of every manifestation, confirm a terrifyingly specific mathematical constant. It doesn't matter how fast they are appearing or how quickly others are vanishing.
The central supercomputers confirm that there are never more than exactly 360 figures on planet Earth at any one given time. Exactly 360.
Let's really break down these numbers because it is the biggest clue in the entire narrative. The entities slowly rotate exactly 360 degrees. They remain in our reality for exactly 24 hours, and there is a hard cap of exactly 360 of them existing simultaneously.
And the staggering realization is that these are entirely fundamentally human constructs. Let's look at history. It was the ancient Babylonians and Sumerians who invented base 60 mathematics and divided the circle into 360 degrees, roughly based on the days in a year and the geometry of equilateral triangles.
Humans define the 24-hour day based purely on the rotational speed of Earth relative to our specific sun. So the massive glaring question is, why in the world would an alien species from Proxima Centauri or Andromeda utilize ancient Babylonian geometry and human temporal mathematics to dictate their invasion?
Right. If they were genuinely extraterrestrial, their biological or technological cycle would be, say, 209 hours based on the rotation of their own alien sun, and they might divide a circle into 100 units based on their own evolutionary math.
But they are perfectly, flawlessly synced to human mathematical history. This raises incredible, mind-bending theories within the story. Danial theorizes, are they not extraterrestrials at all?
Could they actually be highly evolved human beings from millions of years in the distant future, projecting themselves backward through time to study their ancient ancestors during a period of extreme historical crisis?
It's a compelling theory. If they're humans from the future, they would naturally use human mathematics. But there is an alternative theory that I find even more unsettling.
Perhaps they are entirely alien or even interdimensional entities. But in order to physically manifest in our specific dimension, they have to run their existence through a translation matrix.
They might be forcing their incomprehensible reality into human mathematical frameworks at 360 degrees, the 24 hours, just to make themselves compatible with our physical laws.
Which means they are adapting to us.
Exactly. And the implication of either theory is utterly staggering. If they are completely immune to our greatest physical weapons, but they are fundamentally intertwined with our specific mathematics and geometry, we are entirely at their mercy.
We are like a colony of ants trying to comprehend the operating system of a quantum supercomputer. We can observe the output, but we are completely incapable of understanding the code.
It sets up the ultimate cliffhanger for the survival of humanity. But the way the author chooses to end this story, I have to say, it is the most haunting, deeply abrupt anticlimax you could possibly imagine.
The narrative suddenly jumps forward several months. We skip over the rest of the martial law and the cult wars. It's now deep winter again. It is Christmas Eve.
And we see that, despite the trauma, society has incredibly managed to claw its way back to a grim, bruised semblance of normality. The brutal shoot-to-kill curfews eventually worked to crush the rioting. The power grids and water infrastructure are limping along. People are back at work, trying to survive.
Gilbert is alone in the East London flat, raising Robert by himself, trying to give the boy a quiet Christmas. The figures are still here. They are still appearing and disappearing every 24 hours, but humanity has just gotten used to them.
They've been completely normalized. They've just become a depressing, accepted part of the daily weather report. Expect rain, cold winds, and a figure on the M25.
It's the ultimate human trait habituation. We can get used to anything. So on this freezing, snowy Christmas Eve, Gilbert is in his flat. There's a soft knock at the heavy door. He opens it, and standing there in the freezing cold with snow falling around her is Drusilla.
Her head is still completely shaved bald. She is visibly shivering, looking profoundly traumatized, and is completely, utterly silent. She has returned to him, but the text deliberately leaves her psychological state entirely ambiguous.
We don't know what horrific things happened at Martha's cult. We don't know if she has been fundamentally broken by the harshness of the apocalyptic world, or if the fever of her delusions finally broke and she woke up to what she had done.
Gilbert doesn't ask. He just gently pulls her inside the warm flat and holds her as she finally begins to cry.
It's a deeply intimate, fragile moment of human endurance. And at that exact same moment, on the other side of the world, a completely mundane bureaucratic event is occurring. A data worker named Margaret is sitting at a global news tracking desk.
She is drinking stale coffee, staring at the massive live digital map that tracks the locations of the 360 figures globally. And she notices something mathematically impossible. The total number at the top of the screen is dropping.
359, 350, 300.
Exactly. When a figure finishes its 24-hour cycle and vanishes, a new one isn't appearing anywhere else to replace it. The hard cap is failing.
They are leaving, without a single word of explanation. Margaret watches the tracking grid as the numbers plummet over the next few hours. 100, 50,
10.
5.
And finally, the very last figure on Earth, which happens to be standing silently among the frozen trees near the Rio Grande on the Mexico-U.S. border, completes its slow 360-degree rotation. The 24 hours expire. It evaporates into nothingness.
The global tracking grid blinks to 0, and that's it.
It's over. The invasion or the interdimensional visitation or the temporal anthropological study, whatever it truly was, is just abruptly over. There is no final communication. There is no grand laser attack. There is absolutely no explanation given to humanity.
It just ends. It leaves humanity standing bewildered in the smoldering, bloody ruins of its own making.
And that is the true, devastating thematic weight of the entire narrative. The real tragedy is that the figures never fired a single shot. They didn't have to. The thousands of people trampled to death in the Paris riots, the horrific human sacrifices in the Romanian forests, the countless victims gunned down by military martial law, the completely shattered families like Gilbert, Drusilla, and Robert.
All of that damage was entirely, 100% self-inflicted. The figures acted merely as a silent black mirror. They absorbed all light, and in doing so, they reflected humanity's absolute deepest fears, our most hidden prejudices, and our terrifying capacity for rapid, violent fanaticism.
It is a devastating, brilliant reflection on us as a species. We tore ourselves apart because we couldn't handle the unknown. And as we wrap up this massive deep dive, I think it really forces you to look at your own life differently.
It violently reminds you how incredibly fragile the complex structures of your daily routine really are. Your high-speed internet, your fully stocked grocery stores, the basic, smiling, social politeness of your neighbors.
The story argues that it can all dissolve into primal violence in a matter of mere hours when faced with a true existential unknown.
It's the sheer brilliance of the juxtaposition. The author forces us to look at the macro-level collapse of global digital civilization alongside the hyper-intimate, incredibly messy moral crisis of a single, deeply flawed dominatrix desperately trying to outrun the darkness in her own soul.
Both the world and the woman are forced to strip away their aesthetics to see what is really underneath.
So we want to leave you with a lingering and provocative thought to mull over today as you go about your perfectly normal routine. If a physical anomaly appeared tomorrow, something completely silent, something that absorbed all the light around it, but did absolutely nothing else to actively harm you, how long would it take for your own neighborhood, your own community, to tear itself apart out of fear?
And perhaps more importantly, if you truly, deep down, believed the world was ending tomorrow, what secret, hidden parts of yourself would you desperately try to change before the clock finally ran out?
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.